It's our last full week of class, and we're wrapping up kind of just the rise of big business in the state of Pennsylvania after the Civil War. I'm going to try to make this pretty quick. We don't have a ton of stuff to get through, so this week we're going to do things a little bit differently. My plan is to start with a video like this. I'm actually going to have you do kind of a reading worksheet type thing. I haven't decided entirely yet. Out of a book you'll actually use for next year, because your book is awful and I hate using it. So I'm going to have you do that and cover a lot of stuff really quickly, and then I'm going to bring it back to Pennsylvania and look at something called the Homestead Steel Strike in Pennsylvania, one of the most important days that you've probably never heard about in local history, or in Pennsylvania history, world history, not world, American history. In the background, if it sounds like somebody's murdering a cat, we got a new puppy 2 days ago, and it's raining out, and the kids haven't taken him outside yet, so he's going nuts and just howling. Listen, you'll hear that the entire time I'm on here. Anyway, we're going to talk about a couple things going on here. So after the Civil War, businesses can kind of get back to normal to some extent, and we have an economic system that is known as capitalism. Okay, capitalism basically says that people own the businesses, right? That you and I, and that's common to us because we're Americans, and that's what our whole system is based off of. It is private ownership of business. And when you buy a business or if you invest in a business, you take on risk, right? The reward is if that business does well, you make a ton of money. The downside is if that business doesn't do well, you lose money and your business goes under, right? And it relies on something called the free enterprise system. Okay, and free enterprise basically means that the government, for the most part, stays out of businesses. And so, what determines how much, if you go and you buy a pencil at the grocery store, what determines the price of that pencil? Well, one is the cost to make it, right? But the bigger thing is supply and demand. How many pencils there are out there and how badly people want them. Right? Why are diamonds so expensive? Diamonds are so expensive because the supply is very small, but the demand is very high. Right? Why are pencils so cheap? Well, there are tons and tons and tons of pencils, and the demand isn't as high. Right? And so this is the free enterprise system is what we have. Okay, so that the opposite side of that, the good thing about our system is, you kind of have the freedom to do what you want, and over history, over long term, it's created a pretty wealthy economy for us. Right, the United States is a wealthy country. We live better than most people around the world. The downside to that is you get classes. Right? You have your filthy rich people, your Bill Gates, your Donald Trump, your Jeff Bezos, the guy who owns Amazon. But you also have the workers, the people who aren't as wealthy, the poor. And some people say that's not fair, right? That you have people, literally, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos own more money than some countries are worth. And I'm not kidding. They own more than what some countries are worth. And you also have people living on the street that are starving to death. Is that fair? What is the solution to that? Well, a guy by the name of Karl Marx writes a book called The Wealth of Nations, in which he proposes this system where there is no individual ownership of business like ours, where everybody shares and works together. Right? Sounds great. We all work together, and then we share what we've worked for. And so you have no filthy rich people, you have no poor, everybody's even. It's a great system. It's called communism. Here's the problem, right? Communism doesn't work because what are people? Not everybody, but there are always people who are lazy, right? And realize, hey, I don't have to work near as hard as Johnny over here, and I'm going to get the exact same thing he's getting. Right? And so you become less efficient, and it just doesn't work out. Next year I get into that a lot, so I'm not going to beat that over the head this year. So anyway, in the United States, because of our ideas of capitalism, we do have the really wealthy business owners, and we have our workers. Right? So you have two separate groups. Now, there's an idea that comes out at this time called social Darwinism. And I'm hitting all of our key points really quickly. So if you're paying attention, it might be quicker to do this, to listen to this, than it does to actually read through your book when I assign you an assignment. Social Darwinism is developed at the time. And if you know what Darwin proposed, he proposed this idea of evolution, right? The idea that, which I don't buy into, but the idea that, well, whatever. We won't get into evolution, but a part of Darwin's theory said that only the strongest survive, right? Social Darwinism takes that idea and says, well, that's not just in the animal kingdom, that's with people too, right? That the smartest, the best equipped are the ones that will own the businesses, and the people who are not as smart and not as fit. I'm sorry. Every time I film a video for you guys, it's raining. I'm tired, and this stupid dog started barking at 4:15 in the morning. Anyway, the people who aren't as smart and as capable, well, they're down at the bottom, and that's the way it's supposed to be because that's how it is in nature, right? Ironically, this is the same justification Hitler had for killing the Jews in the Holocaust. So we'll get into social Darwinism next year. We're not going to get into that too much, but so. You're rich, you're poor, right? Your business owners, your bosses, your workers, right? Me and you, probably. That's going to breed conflict. And so we have a bunch of different industries popping up around the country, and they're going to give rise to these massive businesses called corporations, right? Corporations, a lot of your parents probably own parts of corporations. A huge business can only get bigger if it can expand, and to do that they need money, right? How do big businesses get money other than selling their products? Well, they can ask for investors, right? So if your parents own a stock, they actually own a small piece of a company. A stock is a small piece of a corporation, okay? And so during the late 1800s or early 1900s, we have a lot of corporations popping up around the country as the economy explodes after the Civil War. One of the big ones is in our area. One of the biggest companies in the world was a company owned by Andrew Carnegie, right? And the company was known as U.S. Steel, based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Carnegie was an immigrant from Scotland, and he moved to the United States, and he started doing something at a very, very young age. And honestly, I mean, I'll tell you this, it's one of those deals where if I knew then what I knew now. At your age, and I get it, you probably won't do this. I didn't do it, and people said it to me. And, you know, I'm 38 now. If you could take money at your age, or even through early high school, early college age, and you could set aside, let's say, even $1,000 a year, and you could invest it in stocks and just let it sit there until you're 60 years old, you will be, more than likely, I don't know if wealthy is the right term, but you will be way farther ahead than anybody that doesn't. That money grows over. Carnegie realized this. Carnegie at a very young age started investing money in stocks, became wealthy, and then Carnegie took his understanding of how that stuff worked, and he started buying up small steel companies. And he organized them into this giant conglomeration, this giant corporation called U.S. Steel. And Carnegie was able to make his steel cheaper than anybody else's. One, by using new science, something called the Bessemer process. Okay, and we talked about how iron was made, right? Iron, limestone, and coke. Well, if you take that in a giant cauldron and then you fire air through there as fast as you can, it burns off the carbon and it creates steel, right? And they did that through a process called the Bessemer process in Pittsburgh. Again, I'm hitting everything as fast as I can here, and I'm covering a lot of information. So Carnegie uses that, creates a massive business in Pittsburgh, and out of that, you get, again, some stuff we're going to talk about later, some problems between the workers and the owners, and we won't worry about that right now, right? What Carnegie does, and what a lot of these big business owners do, is they try to buy up all their competitors. And the way you do that is by making your products cheaper. A couple ways you can make products cheaper, right? One is you can mass produce it and sell it for less. The more you produce, the less you can sell it, right? Two, you can do what Carnegie does, which is called vertical integration. So let's pretend he's making steel, right? You make steel at a steel factory. What do you need to make steel? Well, you need iron, so Carnegie buys iron mines. You need coal, so Carnegie buys coal mines. You need limestone, so Carnegie buys lime. Well, how do you have to get that product to your steel mill? Railroads, right? Well, Carnegie actually starts to build his own railroad. He gets sick of paying the Pennsylvania Railroad. He says, well, I'm just going to build my own. He doesn't actually complete it, but he starts to. Anyway, that's how you make products cheaper. And Carnegie realizes that. All right, where am I at next? I got Carnegie covered. Vertical integration covered. Here's the other thing with Carnegie. Okay, Carnegie had a ton of money. When he retired, he was the richest man in the world. He was the Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon of the United States, right? More money than he knew what to do with. Carnegie had a belief. He called it the gospel of wealth. He actually wrote a book about this. And he said, the rich are rich, but when they die, if you die a rich man, it's a sin. So when you die, take your money and reinvest it in the public. Give poor people the ability to rise up and become rich like you. And Carnegie's thinking for how you did this was through education. Carnegie thought, how can I get education to poor people? What's the best thing I can spend my money on? And the solution was libraries. Carnegie built maybe hundreds of libraries around the United States. It paid for all of it. And the idea was that anyone, no matter how poor, could go to a library, check out a book for free, and learn, get smarter, advance themselves, and start a business and become wealthy. If you've ever been to the Flood Museum in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, you have been to a library built by Andrew Carnegie. That's what that originally was. It was a library paid for by Carnegie, and it was kind of his I'm sorry for the Johnstown flood. Interestingly enough, all these rich guys we talk about in this chapter used to hang out at the South Fork Hunting and Fishing Club just down the road from Johnstown, which had this huge pond, and they would fish and they'd go and hang out. That's what the dam broke and flooded the city of Johnstown. So Carnegie's kind of I'm sorry to the people of Johnstown for wiping 2,000 of them out is I built you a big library, right? Anyway, Carnegie sells out. That's the steel industry, and unfortunately, again, if this was a regular class, we'd spend a lot of time on this chapter. I'm just out of time. Oil, of course, you have a lot of oil in the state of Pennsylvania. Oil is going to be combined into one massive corporation that, again, at one time was the biggest company in the world, called Standard Oil. And Standard Oil is going to be owned by John Rockefeller. And one of the things Rockefeller does is he not only crushes his competition, but he buys them up. So what all these companies are doing, Carnegie's U.S. Steel, Rockefeller with Standard Oil, they are eliminating competition. They are creating what is called a monopoly, where one business controls an entire industry, right? Good for businesses, because once you do that, you can set your own price, right? If you don't have competition is what determines, do I buy John's apples or do I buy Dave's apples? They're the same apple. Which one do I buy? Whichever one is cheaper. So competition is good for you and I, the consumer. It is bad for businesses. And if businesses can eliminate all of their competition and form a monopoly, right, it's good for them, bad for us. You get that in railroads with the Vanderbilt family. If you ever get a chance, look up the Vanderbilts built that what at the time was the biggest house in the United States. I don't know if it still is or not. It's called Biltmore. It's in Asheville, North Carolina. Biltmore. Look that up sometime. You can actually go visit it if you want to. Vanderbilts are in the railroad industry. George Westinghouse, a Pennsylvania man, gets involved in railroads with making brakes for trains. We're not going to be able to get into all this stuff. I'm going to focus more on Carnegie. So I'm wrapping up. I try to keep these right around 15 minutes if possible, and I know I'm kind of stuttering through this at this point. And wrapping up with this, we're going to finish by watching something about a strike that occurs in the state of Pennsylvania. How do workers, the poor, gain something over their rich employers, right? How does the average worker better their lives, right? The way they do that is they form a union, right? So if these are my workers, right, and one guy comes to me and says, Mr. Carnegie, I want more money or I'm going to quit. Carnegie says, get out of here. I can hire somebody else to replace you, right? But if all your workers band together, right, and form a union, and the union comes to Carnegie and says, Mr. Carnegie, I want more money or I quit. And if all your workers say that at once, Carnegie can't fire everybody at once. Rockefeller, whatever, you get the point, right? And they have to negotiate for better conditions. Today, that's how we do it, right? The workers and the owners get together and they say, what is an agreement we can both be happy with? In the time period that we're in, negotiations don't really happen all that often. Right? The workers come to the business leaders and say, we want more, and the business leaders say no. And back then, when workers would go on strike, business leaders would actually hire armed guards oftentimes to come in and put the strike down. In some cases, beat up the striking workers. And we're going to look at a case that happens at the Homestead Steel Strike in Homestead, Pennsylvania, just down the river from Pittsburgh. In this chapter, and we'll kind of use that as an example for how things like this could happen anywhere. So we'll wrap up with that. I had another point I wanted to make, but I guess it's not all that important. So I'm going to have you read in your book. In the book you'll use next year, I have a Adobe file online. Take a little quiz with that. You're going to watch a video on the Homestead Steel Strike. Probably take a little quiz with that. It's about 45 minutes to an hour long, and that'll be it for this week. That'll give you, I think, probably around 2 hours worth of work. And that's what I try to keep you at every week. Next week is really our last week. We'll have a real quick little thing to kind of wrap up what we're doing in this class. Again, didn't make it quite as far as I wanted to. Kind of rushed through some things I wouldn't have needed to rush through had we been in class, but that's what we got to deal with this year. So hopefully everything's going well. Some of you are doing a really good job of getting your assignments in very early. Please keep that up. For the rest of you, make sure if you're missing something, you're going back and catching up on that, because we're going to run out of time here pretty quickly at the end. So have a good week, and I'll talk to you later.